from wavetables.lol. That's right, baby. It's wavetables.lol. Home of KRC Mathwaves. My gigantic, baby, collection of wavetables, single cycle waveforms, and even some samples for all sorts of modern synthesizers, including our groovy friend Korg Multipoly, which we're listening to here. And I think that's a nice little smooth jam, don't you? And Multipoly has a really cool feature called a Waveshaper Oscillator, and we're going to get into that today. We'll talk about what waveshaping is, where waveshapers come from, and all that kind of good stuff. Run through some patch ideas, and what else? Let you hear the sounds of this very interesting oscillator that's part of this very beautiful Korg Multipoly synthesizer, okay? The track you're hearing right now, again, every oscillator in these patches, which are being played in multi-timbral mode on the Multipoly, so 4 different parts being sequenced at once. These are all using the Waveshaper Oscillator exclusively. And you can find this track in its own video that I put up a couple of days ago. That's no talking, just the quote-unquote music. I don't know, I thought it's pretty good. It's a little musical sketch. Let's get rid of our friend Bitwig here. We will be taking a look at the Waveshaper Oscillator in Multipoly. All right, but first, what has been going on? Well, it's been the holidays, you know. I'm recording this January 3rd of 2025, and I know the holidays can be difficult for some people, so I hope, friend, that you survived okay. I had a really nice break for the most part. I took a little bit of time off, what was I going to say? I took a little bit of time off. It was nice to have some downtime, spend some time with my wife. And as for my Christmas, the women in my life, knocked it out of the park. Hold on, I gotta see my camera. The women in my life knocked it out of the park with, they all got me black t-shirts with cool prints on them, including this one that has the basic synthesis waveforms on it, which is just perfect for today. I got a bunch of other cool and music and synth related t-shirts. We'll see in future videos. So I was super happy about that. That was really fun. Also, I got some Dungeons and Dragons minifigures, Lego minifigures. I'm really into those. I don't know. I'm weird. Synthesizers, Lego, t-shirts. What else do you need, right? Anyway, so that was a good part. But then there was a little bit of a bad part to the holiday. So on Sunday, my lovely younger sister, who's one of those people that everyone just loves and is just she's just a super cool human being, was in a really bad traffic accident. So she was pulling through an intersection and a driver going the other way ran the red light and hit her at a pretty high velocity and left her with a couple of leg fractures. She broke both her tibia and her fibula on one side, but it messed up her ankle, and she's got 9 broken ribs and a fractured sternum. So she's been in the hospital since then, and she is recovering. They did do surgery on her ankle, but these types of things are she's in for probably a fairly long recovery. And so one thing that I'm doing to help her out is I'm doing a bit of a fundraiser. Drink time. I'm doing a bit of fundraiser. So KRC Mathwaves, which is a collection of 160,000 plus wavetables and other stuff, is back to its normal price of $29, but If you follow the link in the description, there'll be links for all the stuff I'm talking about today in the description to this video. If you follow the link or use code Sandra at checkout, you can get KRC Mathwaves for just $20, and 100% of the proceeds from those sales will go to my sister and her family to help defray the costs of her recovery. And so I appreciate anyone who does that. I'm also going to put a link to the GoFundMe page for her, and if you're feeling it in your heart, to help out, you will have my eternal gratitude. Okay, back to more fun stuff. Let's do friends of the channel. So, friend of the channel, Aquila Rift, who did a really cool set of presets, performances for ModWave based on the free version of KRC Mathwaves, and you can find information on those in a previous video, has taken some wavetables that friend of the channel, Ian Dixon, put out recently, and sent to Ian a whole set of great performances, and you can get those in his channel. Again, links in the description. Go check out Ian Dixon. He's super cool, does a lot of cool stuff with these Korg research and development synths, just like I do. Okay, so let's maybe get into waveshaping, shall we? What is a waveshaper? So waveshaping is a time domain technique where we take one waveform and transform it into usually a more harmonically rich waveform using a transfer function. And I was going to make my own diagrams for this, but it turns out that Perfect Circuit, the online retailer of all things electronic music, has a great article actually about waveshaping, and there will be a link in the description, and they have diagrams that are already like really nice. So one way to understand waveshaping is to look at a very simple transfer function. Okay, so what we do is we take an original signal, so like this, okay, is a sine wave, roughly, right? And then we've got a transfer function that's just like this linear ramp, right? That goes from -1 up to +1, and it's at this 45-degree angle. So if we take this input signal and we transform it, right, with a transfer function that looks like this, the output signal will be identical, okay? And now let's say that we wanted to invert this sine wave. Well, if we ran it through a transfer function that goes the opposite direction at this 45-degree angle, we'll wind up with the negative version of that waveform. We might say that this waveform has been phase rotated by 180 degrees. And so what you can see from this is that if we, any like deviation from this kind of 45-degree ramp is going to give us different wave shapes on the output. So here's an example. I'll zoom that in the video where here's our input signal, and then we've got this like jiggity jaggedy transfer function, and then the output signal now has all these like little jaggities in it, okay? And this waveform, we can be sure, is going to have more harmonics than the input signal, which is the sine wave, right? The sine wave is just a single harmonic, right? It has only the fundamental frequency. This waveform is going to sound, I don't know, kind of triangle-y, sawtoothy. So that's the idea with waveshaping. And historically, waveshaping is associated with West Coast synthesis. I think this idea of West Coast versus East Coast synthesis, talk about that a little bit, is a little bit of what you might call it's like a kind of a retconning, or like a retronym. I don't really know the name for it, but I'd never heard those terms like growing up in synthesis, right? Like I've been into synthesizers since the 80s, and I only really started hearing these terms in later years. And but the what's called the East Coast school of synthesis is kind of represented by the approach taken by Bob Moog, particularly as he was designing like the original architecture of polysynthesizers, polysynths, right? So where the approach is you take harmonically rich waveforms like the square wave, the sawtooth wave, and you make them simpler using filters. And this mimics the behavior of acoustic instruments, right? Which typically start out with more harmonically rich sounds, and then as they decay, they go sort of toward a sine wave. And so a filter is one way to get that effect. Also, the other classic synthesizer modulation routings, like LFO to tuning and stereo panning based on, some sort of ramp or maybe the note number, things like that, right? So that's kind of the West Coast school, the East Coast school of synthesis. Meanwhile, on the West Coast, folks like Don Buchla, right, were doing different kinds of electronic musical instruments. That a lot of the music made with it is more, blippy, bloopy, generative kind of stuff being done with modular synthesizers. And one key component there, while filters can be involved in West Coast synthesis, and there's no reason that they couldn't be, one thing that was part of Buchla's approach was instead of starting with harmonically rich waveforms, you would start with a simpler waveform and then use processes like wavefolding and waveshaping to make it more harmonically rich. And so the waveshaping oscillator, play something, Keith. The waveshaping oscillator in Korg multipoly is kind of a nod to that West Coast style of synthesis. In Korg multipoly, you can kind of think of the waveshaping oscillator in a couple different ways. Like one, it's sort of a waveform design playground. And we'll talk about the specific parameters, but you can see that I can make all sorts of different wave shapes by adjusting gain, adjusting this parameter called offset, and also changing the pulse width of the incoming waveform. And there are two types of sources. You've got a sine wave for a source, or you can run a triangle wave through the shaper. The sun just came out here in San Francisco, and I'm like heavily backlit today. I've closed my drapes. I'm trying to control that, but okay, we'll just have to deal with it. Another thing that I should say about the Waveshaper oscillator, it has its origins. Oops, that's not what I wanted. It has its origins in the Korg 01W. So the Korg 01W was kind of a successor to the M1 synth, kind of one of the legendary early romplers. And the manual just has for the 01W, just has a list of what the various wave shapers are. But in the multipoly manual, we actually get to see them. So there are a bunch of new ones, but then there are also there are graphs for all of the available wave shapers, and so there must be like more than 64 wave shapers. So I had originally thought, well, to facilitate this demo, maybe I'll do patches that feature every single wave shaper, but that would be like a even longer and talkier and more boring video. But if you want to know more about the wave shaper as it's used in the ONW Thought Forms, a channel on YouTube that focuses sometimes on 90s sort of production methods, has a great video on the ONW, and I will link to it in the description, of course. Also, the Korg Multipoly Owner's Manual is awesome about the wave shaper, and it talks about what the newer wave shapers do and gives some kind of patch ideas and patch tips, and we'll talk through that a little bit. But I did want to point that out. So let's just start with like a very simple one. So let's see. Let's just go grab triangle sine 1. Okay, so this wave shaper is a wave shaper that is designed to take a sine wave and turn it into a triangle wave. Now, that's not an incredibly exciting thing, but you can do different things by modulating the gain parameter. So you've got a gain parameter, and you see that if we were put the gain all the way up, and let's take our pulse width modulation off here, reset that. Okay, let's see, and then let's change our offset back to 0. This waveform over here in my screen is now a triangle wave. And I'm not a big fan of the triangle wave. The manual makes an interesting note, actually, that if you just wanted a triangle wave, you might get a better result with the classic waveforms, which of course does include a triangle wave. And I guess we can maybe hear some slight differences between this triangle wave made by the classic oscillator, and the Waveshaper version. But not much. Another thing I'm doing here is in multi-poly, we do have 2 oversampling modes. So we've got standard and extreme. And extreme runs the audio engine at 96 kilohertz, I think. And which should reduce certain types of aliasing. And I do find, actually, this is the one place in the synth where you can hear an audible difference between extreme oversampling mode when you're using the Shaper oscillators and the standard mode. But otherwise, I don't hear much difference between those 2 settings. So actually, I think most of the patches that I'm demonstrating here today have extreme oversampling on by default. But again, it doesn't make a huge difference. So anyway, the manual notes that if you just want a triangle wave, maybe you shouldn't use this, but it's here. And of course, one thing we can do is we can play with these gain and offset and pulse width parameters to morph the waveform into different shapes. So what I had done with this one is I had originally reduced the gain a bit and then shifted the waveform up so that it clips. How did I do that? And then let's see, the pulse width. We narrowed that. Maybe this gain is too low. As we move this up, yeah. As we start to move that offset up, see, we clip the top of the waveform and it creates this sort of pulse-like shape. So that's a very different sound, right, than, a triangular type of wave. So that's kind of a neat thing you can do. And you can modulate all of these parameters. So it's a little bit like a wavetable in that sense, except that, it wasn't pre-computed. It's being computed on the fly. And you can change these wave shapes quite a bit. Right? So that's the basic concept. And so that's the simplest of the wave shapers. It's the triangle one. Here's another variation on that patch. In this case, it looks like I am running, instead of the sine wave, the triangle wave into the triangle shaper. And you see that as this waveform gets modulated, that we're modulating the gain and we're slightly modulating the pulse width here. As this waveform clips, we get a sound that's not unlike filtering, yeah? You'll also notice an interesting thing here is the filter is actually not engaged. So one interesting thing in multi-poly versus the other Korg R&D synths like Modwave and Wavestate, where the filters are always engaged. Of course, you can simulate the filter being gone, right, by turning the cutoff all the way up and your resonance all the way down. We won't really hear the filter in this case. In multi-poly, we can actually turn the filter off. So here's the filter engaged. And here it is off. And of course, if you were really going, I guess, for that like West Coast sound, like maybe you would not have the filters engaged. It is interesting that you can make like full-fledged synthy sounding patches using the Waveshaper without using the filter. Okay? Let's kind of move along. Let's do some other ones. What is this one? Triangle Tri 3. So in this patch, we're using the triangle into the shaper. Did I just... Oh. So this is a more full-featured patch. It's actually got some effects on it. And again, the filter is not engaged here, but it's what a cool sound, yeah? Okay, that's cool. Let's go into some more advanced shapers, I think. Well, here's the next one, which is square. And so this one, as explained in the manual, let's see, where is that? Here. So we did triangle. This is a square. So the square shaper, if you feed it a sine wave, will kind of make a rounded sort of square wave. But again, if we modulate the pulse width of the incoming waveform, you can see we get all sorts of different wave shapes. That are kind of pulsy in their sound. All right, let's see. Where else are we going? What's this patch like? I think this one must use the triangle. Yeah, so we've got the triangle into the square shaper, and this is going to give us a very interesting wave shape that's kind of like a rounded off sawtooth wave with, you know, kind of slightly different slopes, right? So instead of having kind of a linear ramp, it's got a curvy ramp to it. And of course, I've made waveforms like this in KRC Math Volume 4, where I played around with making sawtooth and triangular waves that have instead of linear ramps, different shape ramps like exponential, logarithmic, the polynomial function ramps, and they do have a very interesting and different sound. With the Waveshaper, we can do that dynamically, and so you note that this sound like morphs as I hold the key. Again, we're not using a filter here. Cool. All right, moving along. Let's see here. What's in this patch? So this is the sine wave shaper with a sine wave run into it. And this gets pretty interesting. I do have the filter on in this one. Let's take the filter off so we can hear the actual sound of this waveform. And again, these are just very simple patches. I've literally just copied the same oscillator, right, from OS1 to OS2, detuned them a little bit with respect to each other. And you see that we can make all sorts of interesting wave shapes. Like we could adjust the offset here for a more pulsy kind of thing. And then here, as we move the offset up, we start to get this little dent in the waveform. It's a little bit like an FM sort of sound. And I do seem to be modulating, let's see, we're modulating the pulse width with an LFO, and I think we're modulating gain with velocity somewhere. Oh, we're modulating offset with velocity. And we could go either direction. Up or down. Now, with most of the, I guess I talked about this before, but with many of these shaper models, you can get a clipping effect if you move offset wildly. This one does not exhibit it. Well, it does exhibit it here at negative offset. You see that we're starting to get this flat part here. Let's just solo that oscillator. That's a pretty cool sound. Taking that same idea, the again, very simple shaper, you can turn this into a pad. And I'm not playing these complex chords, I'm just hitting a single key. I'm using chord mode. So, as I mentioned in my overview review of multi-poly, there'll be a link somewhere here, there is a chord mode where you can just, like, if you hold down the chord button and play some keys, or you can actually enter the values in here if you want to and activate chord mode, you will play a larger number of voices. Which is like a really nice way to get this kind of very, I don't know, this sounded like a kind of a 90s sort of sound to me. Cool stuff, right? So here's the sine shaper with a triangle wave run into it. And in this patch, you'll see I've got my pulse width on these set fairly low or fairly high. And as we do that, this shaper is giving us, well, this is like a rectified sine wave, which has a sound similar to a sawtooth wave. But we can make that wave shape, kind of approach some sort of weird modified sawtooth wave by severely moving the pulse width up. And I'm also modulating that with velocity. So if we click into the editor here, is it? Oh, I guess I'm not modulating that with velocity. It's probably offset again. Yeah. So velocity is going to offset. And so depending upon the velocity with which I hit the key, we go from this thing that's like almost a sawtooth, right? It's sort of a modulated sawtooth. Then we get this kind of more rounded waveform as we hit with higher velocity. It's a very interesting effect. Turn off the filter. I'm making non-filter face now. Okay, that's kind of a cool thing. And I found that a lot of the shapers used in this way can give you all sorts of interesting variations on the sawtooth wave that are fun to use in like big patches, that where you'd usually use a sawtooth wave. You can get really nice, interesting variations doing this. And here is another variation. So we've got oh, I guess this is just with the filter turned off is the variation here. So I guess I didn't have to do that manually. I could have gone to the next patch, whatever. Yeah, I think you're starting to get the idea of what you can do with these guys. The sine 2 shaper is a little more complex, and you can see that we can make these waveforms with sine 2, just running the sine wave into them, that sort of look like FM-y sort of waves. Again, the filter is not engaged. You see, this sounds morph in a very interesting way, and as this part of the waveform bunches up, we get a kind of a resonant effect. If we turn gain down, we can get a more simplified wave. Another thing I guess I should note, like while we're looking at a complex waveform like this, is there is a low-pass filter that is on the Waveshaper. In the editor, it's up here. Let's just solo oscillator 1, shall we? And listen to the effect of it. You can see that by default, it is set to just below the Nyquist frequency, right? So this is almost 24,000 hertz, which at 48 kilohertz would be the Nyquist cutoff. And so I assume this is a very steep filter that's designed to control aliasing, right? If I turn this down, you'll actually see the wave shape change as it gets very low. So we can simplify our waveforms with this. It's called the pre-low pass filter. The pre in this case does not mean that it's applying the filtering to the source waveform, the sine or the triangle. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. It's applying this filter before this waveform reaches the mixer, right? So you see that we've gone, to a very simplified version of this waveform. If we move this back up, it's more harmonically rich. And then it gets simpler. And we could modulate this, I suppose. Let's add that, shall we? Let's do filter B envelope to the low pass filter. So I've got it set to 1,000 hertz, and we'll modulate it up. That's pretty interesting how that waveform simplifies itself. So that's another alternative to using the modeled filters. Let's turn OS2 back on. I guess we could apply a similar effect, right, to OS2. Let's dial that all the way down. Let's put filter B envelope on it. Modulate that up a bit. Has an interesting sound down low. And of course, we could engage the modeled filter as well. Let's do the sweet sounding SEMP on it. Yeah, cool. Turn it off. Nifty. All right, so then you've got other sine shapers here. Oh, and this is just using a single oscillator. You see that we're transforming the triangle wave into this much more complicated waveform. It's got a really cool resonance in it, right? Now, with the sine 4 shaper, this looks to me, let's go look at its shape, shall we, from the manual? I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you're a big nerd like me. So sine 4, right, it's 4, the shaper is 4 cycles of a sine wave. And as we modulate gain, it looks like, yeah, you see, like when I press a note, our gain is being modulated up on both OS1 and 2. We get kind of a wave folder kind of effect. Very cool. And, if we change our pulse width, we can make that more nasal if we want to. Maybe we should do that. There's also, you'll note, there's a built-in modulation destination for the dedicated pulse width LFO, which is over here. to the pulse width setting itself, right? That's right here, so that you can get little animations that like kind of keep these waveforms moving, even once we've done our dramatic sweep on the gain. I think that's a pretty cool effect too. How many times am I going to say cool in this video? I don't know. Whoa, that one's even more aggressive. Yeah, I think we've added some cool effects. Oh, the vintage flanger. Yeah, and then we've got a bunch of reverb on it. Why not, right? But again, look, Ma, no filters. And I'm making non-filter face. Now in this patch, what I'm doing, actually, I wanted to show, like, so this Sine 4 oscillator, or the Sine 4 shaper, reminded me, it looks like wave folding. I had done, there's at least, well, there's a bunch of them, but there's at least one waveform or wavetable in KRC Mathwaves. It's the Math Volume 4 collection where, you know, I'd done all these variations on the triangle and the sawtooth and even the square wave. But I kind of forgot about the sine. So at the very end, I just threw in a wave folded sine. So this wavetable that's here in oscillator 1, like morphs from a highly wave folded sine wave down to an unfolded sine wave. And you can hear, if I solo it, that's not unlike the same effect here. Or even if we use the Berkeley shaper. So the Berkeley shaper is like the default, at least it's the one that is selected in the multi-polys and knit patch. And this is like a classic wave folder. You'll see that this shape. If we were to change our offset maybe to 0, and let's turn let's put center pulse width kind of back to the default, it's like 50%. That's a very classic wave folder kind of sound. Here it is with the sine wave. Not unlike what I did here in this wavetable. Together, oops, together. There is, as I was mentioning, there's a bunch of cool ideas in the documentation, and one of these is around this shaper called Pickup 1 and Pickup 2. So the Pickup shaper, let's see, where are they here in the manual? There they are. These wave shapers are actually designed for a specific sound, and it's to emulate an electric piano. So with the gain all the way up, you could do this two ways. You could either start with the gain all the way up and modulate that down, or start with the gain all the way down and modulate that all the way up. It creates a sound that's a lot like an electroacoustic instrument, like an electric piano, right? Now, I didn't find this to be quite as bright as I might have liked it. So I did do a variation where in this patch, I'm using pickup 1 shaper in oscillator 1. Let's get our editor back up, shall we, Keith? And pickup 2 shaper in oscillator 2. And I'm modulating the volume of oscillator 2, which is tuned up an octave with respect to the first one, with just a very short envelope, just to kind of get more of a tine sound in it. I mean, it's fairly convincing. That's pretty interesting that they put that in there. Others, okay, we're getting into like other types of shapers here. So with this one, we're using a shaper called Zigzag in oscillator 2 and a shaper called 10 cycle in oscillator 1. And you'll see that oscillator 2, this is a very, it's a very complex waveform that morphs in interesting ways as we adjust the gain parameter. And you can probably hear, as I hold a note, there's a little, there's a little sine wavy sound that you hear going up. That's from, in filter B, we've got the multi-poly low pass filter. In filter A, we've got the ladder high pass, so that's a Moog style high pass, and it's got the resonance turned way up. So as this high pass filter gets modulated up in frequency, we start to hear this sine wave emerge, right? So that's a neat little idea. Other things that I discovered when playing around with the shapers. So here is a patch. I guess it's just one oscillator right here. So in Os1, I'm running a sine wave into this shaper called additive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which kind of, the documentation says basically adds harmonics 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 at, I think it's at maximum volume. So there's no fall off. So unlike a sawtooth wave where those harmonics would fall off with the 1/n relationship, it makes more like a pulse wave. And if you look at this waveform, it's got this, the way I've adjusted it here, it's got this kind of windowed sine-like shape, and that is actually a VOSIM waveform. So this actually makes a formant, and so it sounds like a human voice a little bit, right? Sort of like a retro vocal simulator voice, you know, made into a more complex patch. So that's pretty neat. And of course, in KRC Mathwaves, there's a whole exploration of these VOSIM inspired waveforms. Spit it out, Keith. But it's neat that you can also make VOSIM-like stuff in the Waveshaper. Very cool. What other discoveries are there? This patch is using the Berkeley, that kind of classic wave folder Waveshaper. And it looks like the sources are sine waves. You can see I can get some very complicated, shapes here. The other thing that's going on in this patch is I'm using the cross-modulation. So I haven't played with cross-modulation too much. Now we've got a ring modulator. We don't have FM in multi-poly, but you can do things that are quite FM-like using the cross-modulation. And so what's going on here is oscillator 1 is cross-modulating oscillator 2. And I've tuned oscillator 1 to just an arbitrary transposition. I was like, well, what'll happen if we put transpose at about you know, 3 semitones up, right? And then I cranked up the cross modulation to a point that sounded interesting to me. And what I discovered is that, let's see, what's our tune at? Minus 0.81. So once I did that, I got this very FM like sort of sound, right? But it's out of tune. Like if we were to turn on another layer that's got, does this have an oscillator in it? Yeah. Hear how that's like wildly out of tune? But we can bring layer A back into tune, you know, just by adjusting our tune parameter here. So that's something interesting to play around with, cross-modulation. I've not explored this much yet. There's so much to explore in this synthesizer. There are other wild shapers that are in the Waveshaper Oscillator. I thought this one was really interesting. So here we're using in Oscillator 1, this shaper called Geographic to make this kind of pulsy waveform. And then at Os 2, we're using this shaper called Resonate. And I thought it was really interesting that in Oscillator 2, if we modulate, what are we modulating here? Yeah, we're modulating the gain very slightly. No, we're modulating the pulse width very slightly. You can barely see it moving. Wait, yeah, oh, whoa, that's pulse width. Maybe it is the gain. Where is it? What's moving? What's moving? Is it the offset? Sorry, I can't remember. I can't remember what I was doing here. Let's see. Let's change gain. Gain, yeah. Pulse width. Whoa, pulse width does that. Oh, that's wild. Oh, yeah, okay. Let's get our LFOs. I just think that's so interesting how that how these complex resonances in here can be made to move. But where the hell am I moving them? Let's see. So we've got, I guess it's here. It's a very low intensity from the pulse width modulation LFO. I thought this had to be slower though. Let's see. Is there a very slow? Oh yeah, filter B. What is filter B LFO modulating? What is it modulating? Is it offset? Ah, there it is. Filter B LFO is modulating on the offset parameter just a little bit. It's making those resonances animate. I guess if I move this up, oh yeah. If I move it up, it starts moving like way too big, right? So just a tiny amount. And the LFO speed is really, really slow. So you see like filter B is only at 0.4 or 5 hertz. If it's up, like at 2, these get crazy. And then when it's low, they just get very gentle motion in them. Turn off the filter. This is almost a sample-like texture, yeah? I hope you enjoy watching me faff around with things like this. Like and subscribe for more talky synthesizer content, eh? I appreciate all of our subscribers. Like, we're well over 1,000 subscribers now. Thank you so much. Another interesting variation using those two. We've already heard this multi-mode patch. This is interesting. So there's this shaper called sine octave, and using the modulations I've set up here, it's a very string-like sound. So that's coming from Oscillator 1. Fat fingers. And then, you know, there's a little bit of that coming from Oscillator 2, but not as much. And a more complex, I guess that was the more complex version of the patch. This is the simpler version. Very interesting though, right? And all done, again, without filters. Oh, this is kind of a fun experiment. So this is a Waveshaper patch. It's using this kind of unusual shaper called Reptile and this shaper called Take 1 to make these pretty complex waveforms. But what I've also done is I wanted to see, because I hadn't done this yet, like in the CMT voice variation part of the synth, right? This is where the trick of the oscillator drift and the analog-like behavior of the different voices comes from. I was like, oh, what happens if you turn oscillator drift all the way up and then we turn the scale for the variation all the way up? Like, what's the most out of calibration, sound we can get out of multipoly? It's actually very interesting and it's kind of pleasing. There's just all these little micro things happening. You heard that one voice right there. Its filter was way up higher than the other ones. But it doesn't exactly sound like a broken synth. It's a very pleasant effect. I turned the same idea into a pad. Oh, what is this guy all about? Oh, yeah. I wanted to talk about how I had done wave shaping. So this is not a Waveshaper patch, but in my collection called KRC Split in KRC Mathwaves, there are some wavetables that incorporate a wave shaping kind of technique. And so what's going on here is there's two different basic synthesis waveforms. Over the course of the wavetable, they're being, you can think of it as they're being split apart or pushed closer together. It depends on how you want to think about the phase of them. But you also see that the slopes here of these different waveforms change a little bit, and that's due to wave shaping. So this is kind of a simple, I think it's like a kind of a polynomial curve used as the wave shaper. So I had explored this, and there's also this pulse width modulation idea that's going on in here. So it's a similar concept to what's in Korg's Waveshaper, but I just hadn't explored it as deeply as Korg has with all these wildly different shaper curves. But this is a similar idea, and so there's hundreds of these split with wave shaping wavetables in KRC Mathwaves. Let's see, here's another one. It's kind of a keyboard patch. I guess that's keyboardy. It's using the Take 2 and the Take 5 shaper. You can see these waveforms get very complex. So I do have the filter in use here. We're using the SE style filter. If we take it out, this is what it sounds like. I thought that was maybe a little too powerful, right? So some of the shapers can make very, very complex shapes. They can also make simpler shapes. So there's a set of waveforms, or sorry, that's hard to come up with the right word, right? There's a lot of shaper transfer functions that are hyperbolic tangent. And I think I showed this a little bit before, but with your settings the right way, here I've actually got the triangle wave going into this with a gain of 0. And then a very small pulse width. The pulse width is 0. You can get the sawtooth wave. But you can see that with the right modulation, we can change the shape of its ramp. So you see, as we modulate gain, we can actually change the shape of that sawtooth ramp. So, that's something I'd explored before in KRC Mathwaves Volume 4, but it's pretty interesting that you can have it here dynamically, using the Tanch. This is the Tanch 8 Waveshaper. And then here's a more complex version of this patch, I guess. Yeah. So here again, we're using the Tanch 8 shaper in Oscillator 1, but we're also modulating I think it's its pulse width. Where is your motion coming from? See, it's been a few days since I made these. Oh yeah, it is coming from the pulse wave LFO. And so you see, if I turn that LFO all the way off, this peaky shape here just stays in the center. But as I increase the amount of the LFO modulation, we get this really interesting, it's kind of like timbre and phase. You can see this is almost like it's a very small pulse width sawtooth wave at the ends, and then it's this more rounded, kind of a rounded off pulse shape in the center. It has a very interesting timbral change. You could hear it more if we turned the filter off. And I think I'm also modulating pan here. So like as this guy is changing, he's going back and forth across the stereo field. Lots of fun stuff you can do. This waveform, I think, is rather like the blade wave that you'll find in certain Pittsburgh modular oscillators. They have this concept of a PWM-able sawtooth wave. I think this is rather like that. Let's see. Are we out of Waveshaper patches? We are. I think there are some other things I do want to say about the Waveshaper, but maybe this is a good time for me to take a break. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of the Waveshaping oscillator in multi-poly. It's super, super useful, super interesting, can create a very wide variety of timbres. You can do more complex stuff like this. Let's see here. So this is using a shaper called Cocoon that's really cool. Look at all those crazy shapes it can make. And then we're just using like a random sample and hold style LFO to change all these parameters, and it reminds me of electricity, right? And one fun thing about this is, you can see it's got all this very high frequency content that kind of sounds like noise up here. But if we go way, way low on the keyboard, we'll start to hear those as pitches. It's like a weird electric jungle. I love it. It's crazy experimental synthy stuff. Super fun. Okay, I'll take a short break, and we'll be back with some closing thoughts, I'm sure. Oh, there is one other thing I did want to talk about. Where is my levels patch? You might have noticed I missed this when I was going through this patch before. But you might have noticed that, whoa, we're way down on the keyboard. Come up. Pull up, Maverick. You might have noticed that in a lot of these Waveshaper oscillator waveforms, the full spectrum of values isn't always used. And of course, when we have a waveform like this, that, is kind of using the full code of the volume that we have to work with, this is going to have a louder sound than an oscillator that has a lot of DC offset in it. So we call this phenomenon of a waveform not taking up the full space DC offset, direct current offset, right? And so this waveform, though it might be hard to hear, is lower in volume than this waveform. And so if we wanted to accommodate for that, like in this patch, velocity is changing the shape of the waveforms. So like low velocities are this kind of sawtooth sound, and then high velocities are this more nasal sound. But by default, this would be quieter than this, which is not what we want, right? We're using velocity to modulate the waveform, and theoretically, we would want this one to sound louder than this one. And so if we wanted to accommodate for that, what we could do is we could modulate the level going into the mixer. So you'll see that to make up the gain from that DC offset, I've got velocity at about a value of 50 here, adjusting level up. So I'm counteracting that DC offset. This isn't like a bug in the Waveshaper. It's just a feature of like how these transfer functions work. And so I thought that was something that was worth pointing out. If you're an advanced synthesist, you think about these sorts of things. And so that was the last thing I wanted to make an observation about. Anyway, lots of interesting sounds you can get here. That's all for today. Reminder, KRC Mathwaves is on a special fundraising sale. Use code Sandra or follow the link in the description to get KRC Mathwaves for $20. And all of those proceeds go to my sister and her family as she recovers from a quite terrible accident. Anyway, be well, Happy New Year, and I will talk to you later.